Hi, I'm Victoria Hayes. 3 weeks ago, my mother-in-law didn't just humiliate me at my own anniversary party. She had me banned from the venue I paid for, surrounded by guests I invited, celebrating a marriage she never wanted to happen. But here's the thing about underestimating someone who built their own empire from nothing. You forget they know exactly how to tear down someone else's. When the security guards finally arrived that night, they weren't there for me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. It was supposed to be perfect. After months of planning, our fifth wedding anniversary celebration was finally here, and I had poured my heart into every detail. The Grand Ballroom at Riverside Manor gleamed under cascading fairy lights. White roses and eucalyptus draped every surface. And the Pacific. Northwest sunset painted the venue's floor-to-ceiling windows in shades of amber and rose gold. I stood at the entrance, smoothing the silk of my champagne-colored dress, watching our guests filter in through the ornate double doors. Daniel looked radiant in his navy suit, his smile genuine as he greeted old college friends and colleagues from the law firm. This was our moment. Our celebration of surviving 5 years of marriage despite every obstacle thrown our way. Especially despite his mother, Patricia Kensington, who had made it her personal mission to remind everyone within earshot that her son had married beneath his station. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, the founder and CEO of Hayes Marketing Solutions, having built a 7-figure company from my studio apartment 5 years ago, still being treated like some gold-digging waitress who'd trapped her precious son. But tonight wasn't about Patricia's disapproval. Tonight was about Daniel and me, and the life we'd built together despite her constant interference. I had spent the last 3 months coordinating every aspect of this celebration. From the custom menu featuring dishes from our honeymoon in Italy to the string quartet playing the song from our first dance, every element held meaning. The guest list alone had taken weeks to finalize, balancing Daniel's old money Portland social circle with my tight-knit group of entrepreneurs and creative professionals. It was expensive, more than we probably should have spent, but this was our declaration that we weren't just surviving as a couple, we were thriving. The venue itself had been a compromise. Daniel had wanted something smaller, more intimate, but I knew his family expected grandeur. Patricia had made enough passive-aggressive comments about our simple wedding 5 years ago that I wasn't giving her ammunition this time. So I'd booked the most prestigious venue in Portland, the kind of place where senators held fundraisers and tech moguls celebrated IPOs. If she wanted to criticize something, she'd have to work harder for it. As guests began arriving, I positioned myself near the entrance, playing the gracious hostess. Old friends from college embraced me with genuine warmth. Clients from my agency complimented the elegant setup, and Daniel's law firm partners nodded approvingly at the obvious expense and taste displayed throughout the ballroom. For once, everything seemed to be going according to plan. That should have been my first warning. Brooke Sullivan, my best friend since business school and the closest thing I had to a sister, appeared at my elbow carrying 2 glasses of champagne. She looked stunning in a deep green dress that complemented her auburn hair, but I caught the slight tension around her eyes that meant she was on high alert. "Patricia's here," she murmured, handing me a glass. "She arrived about 10 minutes ago and has been holding court near the bar. Fair warning, she's got that look." I followed Brooke's gaze across the room to where Patricia Kensington stood in all her imposing glory. At 62, she remained striking. Her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her black cocktail dress clearly custom-tailored, and her posture radiating, the kind of authority that came from decades of Portland high society leadership. She was surrounded by a small cluster of women I recognized as members of her various charity boards and country club committees, their heads tilted toward her, as if receiving divine wisdom. "What look?" I asked, though I already knew. "The one that says she's about to make tonight about her instead of you." I took a sip of champagne, letting the bubbles steady my nerves. "She can try," This is my event, in my venue, celebrating my marriage. What's the worst she can do? Brooke's expression suggested I shouldn't have asked that question, but before she could respond, Daniel appeared beside us, sliding his arm around my waist with familiar warmth. "You've outdone yourself, Vic," he said, using the nickname that always made me smile. "This place looks incredible. Mom's already complimented the floral arrangements twice." She complimented something I planned? I couldn't hide my surprise. "Don't sound so shocked. She's trying, you know. This whole thing, it's beautiful. She'd have to be blind not to appreciate it." I wanted to believe him. Daniel always saw the best in people, especially his mother. It was one of the things I loved about him, even when it frustrated me. He genuinely couldn't understand why Patricia and I couldn't find common ground, why every family gathering felt like a diplomatic summit between hostile nations. The truth was, Patricia had never forgiven me for existing. From the moment Daniel brought me home during our senior year at Northwestern, she'd made it clear that I wasn't the daughter-in-law she'd envisioned. I wasn't from the right family, didn't attend the right schools, and worst of all, I had the audacity to be ambitious in my own right, rather than content to bask in the reflected glory of the Kensington name. Our wedding had been a barely civilized Cold War. Patricia had questioned every decision, from the venue to my dress to the guest list, always with the tone of someone trying to save a sinking ship. She'd made pointed comments about keeping things simple, when she really meant cheap, and had somehow managed to turn our rehearsal dinner into a subtle roast of my family's middle-class background. But tonight was different. Tonight, I had proof that I belonged in their world, that I could host an event as elegant and sophisticated as anything Patricia herself might organize. The guest list included 2 city council members, the CEO of Oregon's largest tech company, and enough influential Portland figures to stock a society magazine. I'd succeeded on their terms, using their metrics, and even Patricia would have to acknowledge it. The evening progressed smoothly for the first hour. Guests mingled between the cocktail area and the formal dining room, where round tables draped in ivory linens awaited the seated dinner. The string quartet played softly in one corner, while servers in crisp white uniforms circulated with trays of appetizers I'd personally tasted and approved. Everything was exactly as I'd envisioned it. I was chatting with Helen Crawford, one of Portland's most prominent art gallery owners, and a woman whose approval could open significant doors for my business, when I noticed the first ripple of tension. A small group of guests near the bar had gone quiet, their conversations pausing mid-sentence as they turned to look toward the entrance. Patricia stood there with a woman I didn't recognize, both of them deep in what appeared to be an intense conversation. The stranger was younger, maybe mid-30s, with platinum blonde hair and the kind of understated elegance that screamed expensive personal stylist. She wore a simple black dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and she was nodding sympathetically as Patricia gestured toward the ballroom. "Excuse me for just a moment," I said to Helen, my hostess instincts tingling with alarm. I made my way through the crowd, stopping to smile and exchange pleasantries with guests, but keeping one eye on Patricia and her mysterious companion. As I got closer, I caught fragments of their conversation. Completely inappropriate for the Kensington family. Should have been consulted. Exactly the kind of vulgar display. My blood chilled. I'd heard enough of Patricia's critique sessions to recognize the tone, but this felt different, more purposeful, more dangerous. I was about 20 feet away when the blonde woman pulled out her phone and made a call. The conversation was brief, maybe 30 seconds, but when she hung up, she smiled at Patricia with the satisfaction of someone who'd just completed a successful mission. That's when I saw Carmen Rodriguez, our event planner, hurrying toward Patricia with an expression of barely controlled panic. Carmen had planned events for half of Portland's elite. Nothing rattled her. Seeing her flustered sent my anxiety into overdrive. I quickened my pace, abandoning all pretense of casual mingling. "Mrs. Kensington," Carmen was saying as I approached, her voice tight with professional diplomacy, "I'm afraid there's been some confusion. We've received a complaint about the event, and I need to speak with the primary contact for the booking." "I'm the primary contact," I said, inserting myself into the conversation with a smile that felt more like baring teeth. "Victoria Hayes, is there a problem?" The blonde woman turned to study me with the kind of cool assessment usually reserved for livestock auctions. "Ms. Hayes, I'm Amanda Sterling from the Portland Cultural Commission. We've received reports that this event may be in violation of several city ordinances regarding noise levels, occupancy limits, and proper permitting." "That's impossible," I said, my voice steady despite the alarm bells clanging in my head. "We have all the necessary permits, and we're well within capacity limits. I can show you the documentation." "I'm sure there's just been a misunderstanding," Patricia interjected smoothly, her tone dripping with false concern. "Amanda, dear, why don't you explain the situation to Victoria so she can address these issues properly?" The way she said my name, like it tasted bad in her mouth, confirmed what I was beginning to suspect. This wasn't a random complaint or bureaucratic mix-up. This was sabotage. Amanda Sterling's smile was as sharp as cut glass. "Unfortunately, until we can resolve these concerns, I'm going to have to ask you to end the event early. For everyone's safety, of course." "End the event?" I stared at her in disbelief. "We're celebrating our anniversary. We have 70 guests, a seated dinner about to be served, and every permit required by the city of Portland. You can't just shut us down based on some anonymous complaint." "Actually, I can," Amanda replied, her voice taking on the bureaucratic authority that I'd learned to fear from my early days navigating business licensing. The Cultural Commission has broad authority to ensure public safety and maintain community standards. If there are concerns about an event's compliance, we have the right to intervene. I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. Around us, guests were beginning to notice the tension, conversations dying as heads turned our way. This was exactly the kind of scene I'd spent months planning to avoid, the kind of public embarrassment that would fuel Portland society gossip for months. "What kind of concerns, specifically?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain level. "Because I have documentation for everything." Patricia stepped closer, her presence somehow making the circle feel smaller, more claustrophobic. "Victoria, dear, perhaps it would be better if you just cooperated. Making a scene won't help anyone." The condescension in her voice was the final straw. I'd spent 5 years swallowing Patricia's subtle insults, her constant implications that I wasn't good enough for her son or their family. I'd endured countless dinners where she'd questioned my career choices, my background, my worthiness to carry the Kensington name. But this was my event, my celebration, my moment to prove that I belonged in their world. "I'm not making a scene," I said, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. "I'm asking for clarification about why my legally permitted, properly planned anniversary party is suddenly a public safety concern." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria. Daniel appeared at my side, his hand finding my elbow in a gesture meant to be calming. "What's going on?" Before I could answer, Amanda Sterling spoke up. "Mr. Kensington, there are some compliance issues with tonight's event. We're working with your wife to resolve them as quickly as possible." The way she addressed Daniel directly, as if I were incapable of handling the situation myself, made my jaw clench. But it was Patricia's slight smile of satisfaction that truly ignited my anger. "There are no compliance issues," I said firmly. "This is harassment, pure and simple, and I want to know exactly who filed this complaint." "Complaints to the Cultural Commission are confidential," Amanda replied smoothly. but I can assure you the concerns raised are legitimate and require immediate attention." I looked around the circle, taking in Carmen's panicked expression, Daniel's confusion, Amanda's bureaucratic authority, and Patricia's barely concealed triumph. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. "How convenient," I said slowly, "that these mysterious violations were discovered just as our party was getting started. And how fortunate that someone from the Cultural Commission happened to be available on a Saturday evening to investigate anonymous complaints." Amanda's smile never wavered. "The Commission takes all concerns seriously, regardless of when they're reported." "I'm sure you do." I pulled out my phone. "Let me call my attorney. I'm sure he'll be very interested in the Commission's procedures for handling anonymous complaints about legally permitted events." That's when Patricia made her move. "Victoria, honestly," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that had silenced boardrooms and charity committees for decades, "this is embarrassing enough without involving lawyers. These people are trying to help you understand the situation. The least you could do is show some grace." The word grace hit me like a slap. Grace. As if I were the one behaving badly. As if I were the one disrupting a celebration that I'd spent months planning and thousands of dollars funding. As if I were the one who'd orchestrated this public humiliation. "Grace?" I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "You want to talk about grace?" The ballroom around us had gone nearly silent, our raised voices carrying across the space like ripples in still water. I could see our guests pretending not to stare, could feel the weight of their attention like a physical presence. This was it. This was the moment Patricia had been engineering since the moment I'd announced our anniversary plans. "Perhaps," Patricia continued, her tone suggesting she was being infinitely patient with a difficult child, "it would be best if you stepped outside while the adults handle this situation." The adults. As if I weren't a 32-year-old CEO who'd built a successful company from nothing. As if I weren't the person who'd planned, paid for, and hosted this entire evening. As if I weren't the woman whose anniversary we were supposed to be celebrating. Something inside me snapped. "You know what?" I said, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet ballroom. "You're absolutely right. I should step outside." I turned to face the crowd of guests, many of whom had given up any pretense of not watching our confrontation. These were people I'd invited to celebrate my marriage, my success, my place in Portland society. Some were friends, some were clients, some were Daniel's colleagues and family connections. All of them were about to witness what Patricia had always wanted, my public humiliation and retreat. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, my voice steady and clear, "I apologize for the disruption. It seems there are some concerns about tonight's event that need to be addressed. Please, continue enjoying the evening. The bar remains open, and dinner will be served as scheduled." I turned back to Patricia, Amanda, and Daniel, noting with grim satisfaction the surprise in Patricia's eyes. She'd expected me to fight, to make a scene, to give her the dramatic confrontation that would justify her interference. Instead, I was giving her exactly what she'd asked for, my graceful exit. "Carmen," I said to our event planner, "please ensure our guests are taken care of. Charge any additional expenses to my account." "Victoria, wait," Daniel started, but I was already moving. I walked through the ballroom with my head high, acknowledging guests with small nods and smiles, every inch the gracious hostess making a dignified exit. I could feel their eyes following me, could practically hear the whispered conversations that would start the moment I was out of sight. But as I reached the ornate double doors that led to the venue's lobby, I heard something that made me pause. "Well," came Patricia's voice, pitched just loud enough to carry across the room, "I suppose some people just can't handle the pressure of proper society events." The laughter that followed, soft and knowing and cruel, was the last thing I heard before the doors closed behind me. The valet parking attendant looked surprised to see me emerging from the venue so early, but he quickly retrieved my keys, without comment. I sat in my car for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, listening to the muffled sounds of music and laughter drifting from the ballroom windows above. My own anniversary party, continuing without me. The drive home through Portland's winding hill roads gave me time to think, and by the time I pulled into our driveway in the hillside neighborhood, I'd made several decisions. The first was that I wasn't going to cry. The second was that I needed to understand exactly what had just happened and who was responsible. The third was that Patricia Kensington had just made the biggest mistake of her privileged life. I kicked off my heels in the entryway and padded to my home office in stockings, the silk dress rustling with each step. My laptop was still open. From that morning, when I'd been reviewing final details for the party that was supposed to be perfect. Now it felt like evidence from another lifetime. I started with the Portland Cultural Commission. Their website was surprisingly detailed about complaint procedures, violation protocols, and emergency response policies. What I found made my blood run cold. Emergency interventions for permitted events required either imminent public safety, threats or formal complaints filed with supporting documentation at least 48 hours in advance. Anonymous complaints couldn't trigger immediate action unless they involved active dangers like fire hazards or structural problems. In other words, Amanda Sterling had been lying. I dug deeper, cross-referencing commission staff directories with social media profiles and public records. Amanda Sterling existed, but her position was listed as community liaison, not an enforcement officer. She had no authority to shut down events or investigate violations. Her LinkedIn profile showed connections to several prominent Portland families, including a recent endorsement from Patricia Kensington for her work on preserving Portland's cultural heritage. The picture became clearer with each search. Amanda wasn't just Patricia's friend. She was Patricia's weapon. A favor called in, a role played, a performance designed to publicly humiliate me at my own celebration. My phone buzzed on the desk. Daniel. Vic, where are you? People are asking questions, and Mom says there was some kind of misunderstanding with the permits. I'm at home, I said, my voice carefully neutral. How's the party? Confusing as hell. Amanda Sterling disappeared right after you left, and Carmen can't find any record of the complaint she mentioned. The Real Cultural Commission emergency line says they have no record of any Saturday evening interventions. So he was figuring it out, too. And what does your mother say about that? A long pause. She says there must have been a mix-up, that Amanda was probably just being overly cautious. How convenient. Victoria, look, I know Mom can be difficult, but she wouldn't. Wouldn't what? Sabotage our anniversary party? Publicly humiliate your wife in front of 70 of Portland's most influential people? Daniel, she called in a favor to have me removed from my own event. You don't know that. But I did know it, and I was going to prove it. After Daniel hung up, promising to come home as soon as the party wound down, I opened a new browser window and began documenting everything. Screenshots of Amanda Sterling's actual job description, records of Patricia's charitable connections, timestamps from the evening's events. If Patricia wanted to play games with official procedures and public humiliation, she'd picked the wrong opponent. I'd built my marketing company by understanding how to research, document, and present compelling cases to skeptical audiences. Every client pitch, every business proposal, every contract negotiation had taught me the value of irrefutable evidence. Patricia might have old money and social connections, but I had something more powerful, the truth and the skills to prove it. The front door opened around midnight. Daniel's footsteps were heavy on the hardwood stairs, and when he appeared in my office doorway, his face was gray with exhaustion and something that looked like dawning horror. The party ended early, he said quietly. After you left, people started asking questions about the Cultural Commission thing. Carmen called the real emergency line, and when they said there was no record of any complaint or intervention, guests started putting pieces together. I imagine they did. Helen Crawford asked Mom directly if she'd arranged for Amanda to show up, in front of 15 people. I looked up from my laptop. And what did she say? She said she was protecting the family reputation from your publicity stunt. The words hit me like a physical blow. Publicity stunt. As if our anniversary celebration, our declaration of love and commitment, was nothing more than a calculated performance for social media attention. She called our anniversary a publicity stunt. Daniel slumped into the chair across from my desk, loosening his tie with shaking hands. She said you'd gotten carried away with trying to prove you belonged in Portland society, and someone needed to remind you that the Kensington name comes with certain responsibilities. The Kensington name. I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the office walls. I kept my own name when we married, remember? I've never once traded on your family's reputation. I built my own. I know that, but God, Vic, the things she said after you left, about your background, your business, your motivations for marrying me. I tried to defend you, but she just kept going, and some people were nodding along, and I felt like I was watching everything fall apart. He buried his face in his hands, and for a moment, I felt sorry for him. Daniel had grown up believing his mother was difficult but ultimately well-intentioned, that her criticism came from love rather than malice. Tonight had shattered that illusion. She planned this, I said gently. The complaint, Amanda Sterling's appearance, the timing, all of it. How do you know? I turned my laptop screen toward him, showing the evidence I'd compiled. Amanda's real job description, her social media connections to Patricia, the cultural lie, Commission's actual procedures for event interventions. Daniel read in silence, his expression growing darker with each revelation. Jesus, he whispered. She really did orchestrate the whole thing. She's been planning this since we announced the anniversary party. Maybe longer. This wasn't about compliance or safety or any of the reasons Amanda gave. This was about putting me in my place. Daniel stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked our small backyard garden. I have to confront her. This can't stand. Actually, I said, closing the laptop with a decisive snap, I have a better idea. The next morning, I woke early and spent 2 hours in my home gym, working out the anger and frustration until my muscles burned and my mind was clear. Then I showered, dressed in my most professional suit, and drove to my office downtown. Hayes Marketing Solutions occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse in Portland's Pearl District, with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed views of the city and mountains beyond. I'd chosen the space because it represented everything I'd built, modern, successful, and entirely my own. Brooke was already at her desk when I arrived, 2 cups of coffee waiting despite the early Sunday morning hour. Rough night? She asked, studying my face with the keen eye of someone who'd known me through business school heartbreaks and startup failures. Educational night. I accepted the coffee gratefully. I need your help with something. Anything. I want to throw another party. Brooke's eyebrows rose. After what happened yesterday. Because of what happened yesterday. I settled into my desk chair, opening my laptop to the notes I'd compiled the night before. Patricia Kensington wants to play power games? Fine. Let's play by her rules. What do you have in mind? A charity fundraiser. Something elegant, sophisticated, utterly above reproach. We'll invite everyone who was at yesterday's party, plus the entire Portland Cultural Commission Board, plus every society reporter in the city. Victoria, I'm not sure revenge parties are the answer here. It's not revenge, it's justice. I pulled up the documentation I'd gathered about Amanda Sterling and Patricia's connections. Patricia used fake authority and public humiliation to sabotage our anniversary. So we're going to expose exactly how she did it, in front of all the same people who witnessed my supposed disgrace. Brooke leaned back in her chair, a slow smile spreading across her face. You want to publicly humiliate her. I want to publicly vindicate myself. There's a difference. Is there? Patricia counts on people being too polite to call out her behavior. She's spent decades perfecting the art of plausible deniability, of making her victims look petty if they fight back. But what if we don't fight back? What if we just present the facts and let people draw their own conclusions? I opened a new document and began typing. The Patricia Kensington Foundation for Cultural Preservation, a charity fundraiser celebrating Portland's commitment to integrity and public service. We'll honor members of the Cultural Commission for their dedication to honest, transparent governance. You're going to create a fake charity? A real charity. Every penny we raise will go to legal aid organizations that help people navigate bureaucratic abuse. We'll invite Amanda Sterling as a guest of honor, acknowledge her important work, and present a timeline of Saturday night's events as a case study in how not to handle public complaints. Brooke was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against her coffee cup. This is either brilliant or completely insane. Why can't it be both? Because if it backfires, Patricia wins everything. She gets to point to your charity fundraiser as proof that you're vindictive and unstable. And if it works? If it works, she's finished in Portland society. No one will trust her again. I saved the document and turned to face Brooke fully. She destroyed my anniversary party. She humiliated me in front of 70 people, including clients and potential business partners. She called my marriage a publicity stunt and my success a fraud. She spent 5 years trying to convince everyone that I'm not good enough for her son or their family. So you're going to prove her right by stooping to her level? I'm going to prove her wrong by being better than her. Everything we do will be legal, ethical, and transparent. We'll invite media coverage, encourage fact-checking, and welcome scrutiny. The truth is on our side, Brooke. All we have to do is present it clearly. She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, but we do this right. No shortcuts, no questionable tactics. If we're going to take on Portland's Queen Bee, we're going to be absolutely perfect. Agreed. And Daniel? How does he feel about you going to war with his mother? I thought about his expression the night before, the dawning realization of what Patricia had done. He's tired of being caught in the middle. He wants this to end as much as I do. Then let's end it. We spent the next 6 hours planning. Brooke handled the legal requirements for establishing a legitimate charitable foundation, while I researched venue options and began drafting invitation language that would be impossible to decline without looking petty. The key was making everything sound like genuine civic celebration rather than personal vendetta. By the time Daniel found us at the office that evening, we had a complete event proposal, preliminary guest list, and media strategy. He read through our plans in silence, his expression unreadable. A charity fundraiser honoring the Cultural Commission, he said finally. 3 weeks after they supposedly shut down our anniversary party. Celebrating their important work, protecting Portland's cultural integrity, I corrected, with special recognition for citizens who report potential violations. You're going to publicly thank Amanda Sterling for sabotaging our party. I'm going to publicly thank her for her dedication to public service, yes, along with a detailed timeline of Saturday's events and an explanation of proper Cultural Commission procedures. Daniel leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. Mom's going to see right through this. Of course she will, but she can't object without admitting what she did. If she tries to discourage people from attending, she looks guilty. If she attends herself, she has to smile and applaud while we expose her methods. And if she just ignores the whole thing, then she looks weak and defensive, which is almost as good as a confession in Portland society. He was quiet for several minutes, staring out the windows at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the evening darkness. "You know there's no going back from this. If we do this, the relationship between you and my mother is over forever." "Daniel, that relationship ended Saturday night when she had me thrown out of my own anniversary party. The only question now is whether she gets away with it. She's my mother, and I'm your wife." The words hung between us like a challenge. 5 years of marriage, 5 years of trying to find middle ground between his family loyalty and his love for me, 5 years of hoping Patricia would eventually accept me, or at least tolerate my presence in their lives. "What do you need me to do?" he asked quietly. I felt something tight in my chest finally release. "Help me invite the right people. Your family's social connections are still better than mine." He nodded slowly. "Okay, but we do this clean. No lies, no manipulations, just facts." "Just facts," I agreed. 3 weeks later, the Grand Ballroom at Riverside Manor was once again filled with Portland's social elite, but this time the atmosphere was electric with anticipation rather than celebration. Word had spread through the city's interconnected social networks about the mysterious charity fundraiser honoring the Cultural Commission, and everyone wanted to witness whatever was about to unfold. I stood near the entrance in a simple black cocktail dress, greeting guests with the same gracious warmth I'd shown at our anniversary party. But this time, I wasn't nervous. This time, I was ready. Patricia arrived fashionably late, as always. Her silver hair perfectly styled and her expression carefully neutral. She moved through the crowd like a queen surveying her kingdom, accepting compliments on her elegant navy dress and engaging in the kind of polite small talk that revealed nothing. Amanda Sterling entered a few minutes later, looking decidedly uncomfortable despite her professional smile. She'd clearly been briefed about the evening's purpose, but couldn't figure out why she was being honored for an incident that had supposedly been a misunderstanding. The room buzzed with conversation and speculation. Society reporters circulated with cameras and notebooks, capturing quotes and reactions from Portland's most influential residents. Everyone knew they were witnessing something significant, but no one was quite sure what. At 8 o'clock sharp, I stepped to the podium that had been set up near the ballroom's center, tapping the microphone to get everyone's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight for this celebration of integrity in public service. As many of you know, 3 weeks ago my husband Daniel and I hosted our anniversary party in this very room. It was meant to be a celebration of love, commitment, and community support." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. I could see Patricia in the audience, her expression carefully blank. Unfortunately, that celebration was cut short when concerns were raised about potential violations of city ordinances. Amanda Sterling from the Cultural Commission responded immediately to investigate these concerns, demonstrating the kind of rapid response and dedication to public safety that makes Portland's municipal services so exemplary. More applause. Though I noticed several puzzled expressions, Amanda looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Tonight, we want to honor that dedication by presenting a complete timeline of the Cultural Commission's response to citizen complaints as a model for transparent, effective governance." I nodded to Brooke, who activated the large screen behind me. The first slide showed the Cultural Commission's official complaint procedures, with relevant sections highlighted in bold. According to Commission guidelines, emergency interventions for permitted events require either imminent public safety, threats, or formal complaints filed with supporting documentation at least 48 hours in advance. The second slide showed phone records and official documentation. Our anniversary party was fully permitted, with all required safety inspections completed and approved. No formal complaints were filed through proper channels, and no emergency safety conditions existed. A murmur ran through the crowd. I could see people turning to look at Amanda, whose face had gone pale. However, citizen Amanda Sterling took the initiative to investigate potential violations based on informal concerns raised by community members. This kind of proactive civic engagement deserves recognition. The third slide showed Amanda's actual job description and authority limits. As community liaison for the Cultural Commission, Ms. Sterling doesn't have enforcement authority, but her dedication to Portland's cultural integrity led her to go above and beyond her official duties. The murmur grew louder. I could see reporters scribbling furiously, social media posts being typed on phones throughout the audience. Tonight, we're pleased to announce the establishment of the Citizens for Transparent Governance Foundation, which will provide legal assistance to Portland residents who encounter bureaucratic overreach or abuse of process. The final slide appeared, a check for $50,000 made out to the Portland Legal Aid Society. Every penny raised tonight will support citizens who need help navigating complex municipal procedures or challenging improper enforcement actions. Because in a democracy, transparency and accountability aren't just ideals, they're requirements. The applause was thunderous, but I could see the shock and understanding spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. Everyone now understood exactly what had happened at our anniversary party, and more importantly, who was responsible. Amanda Sterling was already moving toward the exit, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. But Patricia remained rooted, in place, her composure finally cracking as the full scope of her public exposure became clear. "We'd like to thank everyone who made tonight possible," I continued, "especially those community members whose dedication to accountability inspired this foundation, because sometimes the greatest service we can provide is simply telling the truth." As the applause continued, I caught Patricia's eye across the ballroom. For the first time in 5 years, she looked at me not with condescension or dismissal, but with something that might have been respect. Or maybe it was just recognition that she'd finally met her match. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Within 24 hours, Amanda Sterling had resigned from the Cultural Commission citing personal reasons. Patricia canceled her upcoming charity board meetings and retreated to the Kensington estate, refusing all media requests for comment. Meanwhile, my phone rang constantly with interview requests, speaking opportunities, and business inquiries. The Portland Business Journal ran a front-page story about entrepreneurial resilience and the importance of standing up to institutional bullying. 3 potential clients reached out within the week, specifically citing my handling of the anniversary party situation as evidence of my strategic thinking and crisis management skills. But the most satisfying call came from Helen Crawford, the art gallery owner whose approval I'd been seeking for months. "Victoria," she said without preamble, "I owe you an apology. I've been watching Patricia Kensington manipulate Portland society for 20 years, and I've never seen anyone handle her with such elegant precision. Would you be interested in marketing our upcoming contemporary art exhibition?" "I'd be honored," I replied, meaning it. "Good. Because after Saturday night, half the city wants to work with you. You've got integrity and backbone, a combination that's rarer than you might think." 2 months later, Daniel and I hosted a small dinner party at our house. Nothing elaborate, just 8 close friends gathered around our dining room table for good food, good wine, and the kind of conversation that flows naturally between people who genuinely like each other. Patricia wasn't invited. It wasn't spite, exactly. More like clarity. 5 years of trying to win her approval, to prove I was worthy of her son and their family name, had taught me something important. Some people will never accept you no matter what you do. The only choice is whether to keep diminishing yourself in pursuit of their validation, or to build a life so fulfilling that their opinion becomes irrelevant. I chose irrelevance. As our guests laughed and shared stories around the table, Daniel reached over and squeezed my hand. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. I looked around the table at the faces of people who valued me for exactly who I was, thought about the business that was thriving beyond my wildest expectations, and considered the marriage that had grown stronger. Through adversity, rather than weaker. None, I said, and meant it completely. Patricia Kensington had tried to write me out of her family's story. Instead, she'd helped me write my own. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, typical Portland weather that matched my mood as I sat in my home office staring at the computer screen. The charity fundraiser idea had seemed brilliant at midnight, fueled by righteous anger and 2 glasses of wine. In the harsh light of a Monday morning, it felt dangerous and potentially career-ending. What if Patricia simply didn't attend? What if the media saw through the premise and portrayed me as vindictive? What if I came across as the unstable daughter-in-law Patricia had always claimed I was? The doubt crept in like fog through the windows, clouding my certainty from the night before. My phone buzzed with a text from Brooke. "Coffee in an hour? We need to talk through this plan before you lose your nerve." She knew me too well. I'd built my business on calculated risks. But this felt different, more personal, more potentially devastating if it went wrong. I drove through the quiet residential streets to Blue Moon Cafe, Portland's least pretentious coffee shop and our usual meeting spot for serious conversations. Brooke was already there when I arrived, commandeering a corner table with her laptop, legal pad, and the kind of focused energy that meant she'd been awake since 5 a.m. researching. "Tell me you've changed your mind," she said without looking up from her screen. "Tell me you've decided to take the high road and let this whole thing fade away." I haven't changed my mind. I slid into the chair across from her, accepting the latte she'd already ordered for me. "But I'm terrified." "Good. Terror means you understand the stakes." She turned her laptop toward me, showing a detailed timeline she'd created overnight. "I've been thinking about this all night, and I think we're approaching it wrong." "What? Do you mean?" "We're thinking like this is about Patricia, but it's not. It's about you, your reputation, your business, your marriage. Patricia is just the obstacle." I studied her timeline, which broke down the evening's events into precise intervals with supporting documentation for each claim. "Explain." Saturday night. "Patricia didn't just humiliate you personally. She attacked your professional credibility in front of some of Portland's most influential business leaders. Helen Crawford, Marcus Chen from the tech sector, 3 city council members, the CEO of Pacific Northwest Bank. These people now have questions about your judgment, your stability, your ability to handle pressure." The truth of that hit me like cold water. I'd been so focused on the personal betrayal that I'd missed the professional implications. "You think my business is at risk." "I think your business is already damaged. The question is whether we can repair it or whether Patricia's narrative becomes the permanent record." She pulled up several screenshots from social media, posts from Saturday night that I hadn't seen. Photos of me walking out of the ballroom, accompanied by captions like, "When the pressure gets too intense," and "Some people just can't handle the spotlight." The posts weren't malicious exactly, but they painted a picture of someone who'd cracked under pressure rather than someone who'd been systematically sabotaged. "This is what people remember," Brooke continued. "Not the details of what Amanda Sterling said or whether her authority was legitimate. They remember you leaving your own party after some kind of confrontation. So the fundraiser isn't about revenge. It's about narrative control." "Exactly. We're not trying to destroy Patricia. We're trying to establish the accurate version of events before her version becomes accepted truth." I felt some of the morning's anxiety ease as the problem shifted, from emotional revenge to strategic communication. This was familiar territory. I'd spent years helping clients manage crisis communications and reputation recovery. The principles were the same, even if the stakes were personal. "We need to be surgical," I said, my mind already shifting into planning mode. Clean, factual, impossible to dismiss as vindictive. And we need allies, people who were there, Saturday night, who saw what happened, who have credibility that reinforces our version of events. We spent the next 2 hours crafting a strategy that was part charity event, part investigative journalism, and part public relations masterpiece. The key was making everything feel inevitable rather than calculated, as if the truth were simply emerging naturally rather than being carefully orchestrated. The venue was the first challenge. Riverside Manor was available, which had obvious symbolic value, but it might seem too aggressive. We needed somewhere that suggested transparency and civic engagement rather than personal vendetta. The Portland Art Museum, Brooke suggested. Neutral territory, prestigious enough to attract the right crowd, and they have connections to the Cultural Commission through their public arts programming. Perfect. What about timing? 3 weeks, long enough to plan properly, short, enough that Saturday night is still fresh in people's memories. We divided the work efficiently. Brooke would handle the legal aspects of establishing the foundation and securing the venue. I would focus on the guest list and media strategy. The invitation language needed to be particularly careful, suggesting important civic celebration without revealing the specific nature of what would be revealed. By the time we left the cafe, I felt like myself again, focused, strategic, in control. Patricia had landed the first blow, but I was far from defeated. The next challenge was Daniel. I found him that evening in our kitchen, mechanically preparing dinner with the distracted air of someone whose mind was elsewhere. He'd spent the day fielding awkward questions from colleagues and friends, trying to explain Saturday night's events without having a clear understanding of what had actually happened. "We need to talk," I said, settling onto one of the bar stools that overlooked our kitchen island. "If this is about confronting my mother directly, I'm not ready for that conversation." "It's not about confronting her. It's about protecting ourselves." I explained the plan, watching his expression shift from skepticism to understanding to reluctant admiration. He asked good questions about potential risks and legal implications, but I could see him beginning to appreciate the elegance of the approach. "You're going to make her expose herself," he said finally. "I'm going to create a situation where the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Patricia can attend and be publicly associated with the facts we present, or she can stay away and look guilty by absence. Either way, people will understand what really happened Saturday night. And Amanda Sterling? We'll have to choose between being complicit in Patricia's scheme or admitting she was manipulated. Either choice damages Patricia's credibility." Daniel was quiet for several minutes, absently stirring the pasta sauce he'd been preparing. "You know this changes everything between you and my family." "Daniel, that relationship was already over. Saturday night made that clear. The only question now is whether Patricia gets to control the narrative about why it ended. My father doesn't know what she did. He thinks Saturday night was some kind of misunderstanding. Then maybe it's time he learned the truth about his wife's methods." The conversation continued over dinner, with Daniel gradually moving from reluctant acceptance to active participation. He had insights into Portland's social dynamics that I lacked, knowledge of which relationships mattered and which reputations carried weight. By the end of the evening, we were genuinely collaborating rather than me trying to convince him. "There's something else," he said as we cleaned up. "Something I didn't tell you about Saturday night." I waited, noting the tension in his shoulders. "After you left, Mom didn't just make comments about the party being a publicity stunt. She said things about your business, about how you'd probably exaggerated your success to impress people. She suggested that your client base was smaller than you claimed and that you'd overextended financially to pay for the party." The words hit me like a physical blow. My business finances were private, confidential, and none of Patricia's concern. But the implication was clear. She was planting seeds of doubt about my professional competence, my honesty, my fundamental credibility. She's trying to undermine my business reputation. It gets worse. She mentioned that she'd heard rumors about client dissatisfaction, suggested that people were questioning your work quality. What rumors? From whom? I don't know, but she said it in front of people who matter in this city's business community. Now I understood the real scope of what Patricia had done. Saturday night wasn't just about embarrassing me personally or even ending our family relationship. It was about systematically destroying my professional standing in Portland's interconnected business and social networks. The charity fundraiser stopped being optional at that moment. It became essential for my survival. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of careful planning and strategic execution. We established the Citizens for Transparent Governance Foundation with proper legal documentation and tax-exempt status. The Portland Art Museum agreed to host the event in their main gallery, surrounded by works that spoke to themes of truth and revelation. The invitation list was crucial. We needed everyone who'd been present Saturday night, plus key media figures and civic leaders who could amplify the message. The language was carefully crafted to sound like genuine civic celebration while hinting at important revelations. Join us for an evening celebrating integrity in public service, featuring a special presentation on citizen engagement with municipal governance and transparency in regulatory enforcement. Cryptic enough to generate curiosity, specific enough to suggest substance. The media strategy was more delicate. We couldn't directly pitch the story without revealing our intent, but we could ensure that the right reporters knew something significant was happening. I reached out to Sarah Kim, the Portland Business Journal's investigative reporter, with a carefully worded suggestion that the event might include newsworthy information about municipal governance procedures. I can't promise what will be revealed. I told her over coffee, but I can guarantee it will be well documented and relevant to your readers' interests in government accountability. Sarah's instincts were sharp enough to sense a story, and she confirmed her attendance along with a photographer. The guest responses were telling. Most of the people who'd attended our anniversary party RSVP'd yes, driven by curiosity if nothing else. Several Cultural Commission members confirmed, including the actual enforcement director who would be able to publicly correct any misconceptions about proper procedures. Patricia's response never came, which was itself a kind of answer. Amanda. Sterling's reply was more interesting. She would attend but requested advance information about her role in the evening's program. I responded with polite vagueness about recognizing community members who exemplify civic engagement. 2 days before the event, Helen Crawford called with an unexpected piece of information. Victoria, I thought you should know that Patricia has been making calls about your fundraiser. She's trying to discourage people from attending, suggesting that it's some kind of setup. What kind of setup? She's implying that you're unstable, that Saturday night triggered some kind of breakdown, and that this event is your attempt to lash out at people who were trying to help you. The irony was perfect. Patricia's attempts to undermine the event were actually confirming its necessity. Every call she made, every whispered warning, was evidence of her consciousness of guilt. Thank you for telling me. Are people buying it? Some are. But others are getting curious about why she's so concerned about a charity fundraiser for government transparency. The harder she pushes, the more people want to know what she's afraid of. Friday evening, the night before the event, I stood in my closet trying to choose the right outfit. The decision felt symbolic, even crucial. Too formal, and I'd look like I was trying too hard. Too casual, and I'd seem unprofessional. I needed to project confidence, competence, and moral authority. I settled on a navy suit that I'd worn to important client presentations, paired with my grandmother's pearl necklace. Professional but not intimidating, elegant but not ostentatious. The kind of outfit that suggested someone worthy of being taken seriously. Daniel found me there, staring at my reflection in the full-length mirror. Second thoughts? He asked. No, just making sure I look like someone who deserves to be believed. You look like someone who's about to change the conversation in this city. I hope so, because there's no going back after tomorrow night. He stepped behind me, adjusting the clasp of my necklace with gentle fingers. I'm proud of you, you know, for not backing down, for fighting back intelligently, for showing me what my mother really is. I'm sorry it had to happen this way. I'm not. I spent 30 years making excuses for her behavior, telling myself she meant well, that her criticism came from love. Saturday night showed me the truth, and tomorrow night is going to show everyone else. Saturday evening arrived. Crisp and clear, Portland's skyline sharp against the darkening sky. The Portland Art Museum was transformed for the event, with subtle lighting that highlighted both the permanent collection and the temporary displays we'd arranged about civic engagement and government transparency. I arrived early to check final details, walking through the gallery spaces with Carmen Rodriguez, who'd agreed to plan this event despite the awkwardness of our previous encounter. She'd been horrified to learn about Amanda Sterling's deception and eager to help set the record straight. "Everything looks perfect," she assured me as we reviewed the evening's timeline. "The catering staff knows their cues, the audio-visual equipment is tested, and security has been briefed about managing any disruptions." "You think there might be disruptions?" "I think Patricia Kensington doesn't go down without a fight, but we're ready for whatever happens." Guests began arriving at 7, and I positioned myself near the entrance to greet them personally. The turnout was impressive. Nearly everyone who'd attended our anniversary party, plus additional business leaders and civic figures drawn by curiosity about the evening's purpose. Brooke appeared at my side, elegant in a black dress that conveyed both sophistication and solidarity. "Patricia just arrived," she murmured. "She's in the main gallery, holding court near the sculpture collection." I nodded, feeling a familiar tightness in my chest. "How does she look?" "Confident, like someone who doesn't think you have the nerve to go through with this. Then she's about to be disappointed." The first hour proceeded like any elegant Portland social gathering. Conversations flowed over wine and carefully prepared appetizers, connections were made and renewed, and the gentle buzz of networking filled the gallery spaces. But underneath the social pleasantries, I could feel the tension of anticipation. Everyone knew they were there for a reason beyond simple charity fundraising. Amanda Sterling arrived fashionably late, scanning the crowd with nervous energy before making her way toward Patricia's group. I watched them exchange words, noting Amanda's increasingly uncomfortable expression as Patricia spoke to her in low, urgent tones. At 8:15, I stepped to the podium that had been positioned near the museum's central staircase, with clear sightlines throughout the main gallery. The conversational buzz gradually died as people turned their attention toward me. "Good evening, and thank you all for joining us for this celebration of civic engagement and government transparency. As many of you know, Portland's success as a city depends on the integrity of our public institutions and the courage of citizens who hold those institutions accountable." Polite applause filled the space. I could see Patricia in the crowd, her expression carefully neutral but her posture tense. 3 weeks ago, many of you witnessed an interesting example of citizen engagement when concerns were raised about potential violations at a private event. Tonight, we want to examine that incident as a case study in how municipal oversight actually works. The energy in the room shifted, conversations stopping entirely as people realized they were about to get answers to questions they'd been asking for weeks. Because in a democracy, transparency isn't just an ideal, it's a requirement. And when public authority is misused, either through ignorance or intention, citizens have both the right and the responsibility to seek the truth. I nodded to Brooke, who activated the large screen behind me, and began the presentation that would rewrite Saturday night's narrative forever. The first slide appeared on the screen behind me, displaying the official seal of the Portland Cultural Commission alongside their mission statement. The room had gone completely silent, except for the soft hum of the museum's climate control system and the distant sound of traffic on the street below. The Portland Cultural Commission was established in 1987 to preserve our city's unique character. While supporting appropriate development and cultural activities, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the gallery. Their enforcement procedures are designed to balance public safety concerns with respect for private property rights and due process. I could see Amanda Sterling in the crowd, her face pale as she began to understand where this presentation was heading. She stood near the back of the main gallery, partially hidden behind a group of city council members who were listening with the intense focus of people who sensed political implications. Let's examine how those procedures work. In practice, using a recent example that many of you witnessed firsthand. The second slide showed a timeline of Saturday evening's events, starting with our anniversary parties scheduled beginning at 6 p.m. and ending with my departure at 8:30. Each major event was marked with precise timestamps and brief descriptions. At approximately 8:15 p.m. on the evening of May 14th, a complaint was raised about potential violations of city ordinances at a private event held at Riverside Manor. The complaint alleged issues with noise levels, occupancy limits, and proper permitting. Several people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. I could see them remembering that evening, recalling their own observations about what had seemed like a perfectly normal, properly managed celebration. According to Cultural Commission protocols, complaints about permitted events must follow specific procedures to ensure fairness and prevent abuse of the system. The third slide displayed the official complaint process, with each step clearly outlined and the required timeframes highlighted in bold text. The legal language was dry but damning when compared to what had actually happened. Emergency interventions can only be authorized for immediate public safety threats or when formal complaints have been filed with supporting documentation at least 48 hours in advance. Anonymous complaints cannot trigger immediate enforcement action unless they involve active dangers like fire hazards or structural failures. A murmur ran through the crowd as people began to understand the implications. I saw Sarah Kim from the Portland Business Journal pull out her phone to capture photos of the slides, her journalistic instincts clearly engaged. The complaint about our anniversary celebration was not filed through official channels. No documentation was provided, no advance notice was given, and most importantly, no actual violations existed. The fourth slide showed copies of our event permits, all properly filed and approved weeks in advance. Fire department inspections, occupancy certifications, noise permits, catering licenses, every document required by city ordinance was displayed, in clear, organized detail. So, how did this complaint result in official intervention by the Cultural Commission? I paused, letting the question hang in the air as I scanned the crowd. Patricia stood frozen near the sculpture collection, her usual composure cracking as she realized the trap she'd walked into. Beside her, Robert Kensington looked confused and increasingly concerned as he followed the presentation's logic. The answer lies in understanding the difference between official Cultural Commission enforcement and well-intentioned but unauthorized citizen action. The fifth slide showed Amanda Sterling's photograph alongside her official job description from the Commission's website. The contrast between her actual authority and the role she'd played was stark and undeniable. Amanda Sterling holds the position of Community Liaison with the Cultural Commission. This is an important role focused on education and outreach, but it does not include enforcement authority. Community liaisons cannot investigate violations, cannot issue citations, and cannot authorize the termination of permitted events. The murmur in the crowd grew louder. I could see people turning to look for Amanda, who had gone completely white and was edging toward one of the gallery's side exits. However, on the evening in question, Ms. Sterling presented herself as having enforcement authority and demanded that our anniversary celebration be terminated immediately due to alleged violations that she could not specify and had no authority to investigate. A woman near the front of the crowd gasped audibly. Others began whispering among themselves, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with almost audible precision. This raises important questions about how such a misunderstanding could occur. Was Ms. Sterling confused about her own authority? Was she acting on incorrect information? Or was she knowingly exceeding her mandate? I let those questions sink in before advancing to the next slide, which showed social media connections between Amanda Sterling and Patricia Kensington. LinkedIn endorsements, charity board memberships, shared social events, a clear pattern of personal relationship that had been carefully concealed during Saturday evening's confrontation. The answer becomes clearer when we examine the relationships involved. Ms. Sterling has served on 3 charity boards chaired by Mrs. Patricia Kensington, has received professional endorsements from Mrs. Kensington for her cultural commission work, and has attended numerous social events as Mrs. Kensington's personal guest. The silence in the room was now absolute. Even the background conversations had stopped as people absorbed the implications of what I was revealing. Patricia had gone rigid, her face a mask of barely controlled fury and humiliation. This creates what ethics professionals call a conflict of interest. When personal relationships influence the exercise of official authority, public trust is compromised, and individual citizens can be unfairly targeted. The next slide showed the timeline of Saturday evening from a different perspective, focusing on Patricia's actions and movements throughout the party. Carmen Rodriguez had provided detailed records of all conversations and interactions, creating a clear picture of coordination and planning. Mrs. Kensington spent approximately 45 minutes in private conversation with Ms. Sterling before the complaint was raised. During this time, they reviewed the event setup, discussed guest attendance, and examined permit documentation that was publicly displayed near the registration table. I could see Daniel in the crowd, his expression a mixture of pain and resolve, as he watched his mother's actions being dissected for public examination. This couldn't be easy for him, but he stood straight and supported me with his presence. Immediately following this conversation, Ms. Sterling made a phone call that lasted exactly 1 minute and 37 seconds. Within 10 minutes of ending that call, she approached our event coordinator with claims of official cultural commission authority and demands that the celebration be terminated. The timing was damning, the coordination obvious to anyone with basic reasoning skills. Several people in the crowd were now openly staring at Patricia, their expressions ranging from shock to disgust. This sequence of events suggests that the complaint about our anniversary party was not a good faith effort to address legitimate safety concerns. Instead, it appears to have been a coordinated attempt to use the appearance of official authority to disrupt a private celebration. I advanced to a slide showing the actual Cultural Commission's response when contacted about Saturday evening's events. Their official statement was brief but devastating in its clarity. When contacted by our event coordinator for clarification, the Cultural Commission's emergency response line confirmed that no complaints had been filed regarding our anniversary celebration, no enforcement action had been authorized, and no Commission personnel had been dispatched to investigate violations. The implications were inescapable now. Amanda Sterling had acted without authority, Patricia had coordinated the disruption, and both had knowingly deceived everyone present about the legitimacy of their actions. This kind of abuse of apparent authority is exactly what the Citizens for Transparent Governance Foundation was created to address. When public trust is misused for private vendettas, every citizen's rights are at risk. I paused to take a sip of water, noting with satisfaction that Amanda Sterling had disappeared entirely, and Patricia looked like she was considering a similar exit. But leaving now would only confirm her guilt more dramatically than staying to face the consequences. Tonight, we're pleased to announce that the foundation has received its first major donation, which will fund legal assistance for Portland residents who encounter similar abuse of process. The slide changed to show a check for $75,000 made out to the Portland Legal Aid Society, along with a commitment to match donations up to another $25,000. Because in a democracy, the solution to abuse of power is not silence or submission. It's transparency, accountability, and the courage to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable. The applause that followed was thunderous, but I could hear the underlying tension in it. This wasn't just appreciation for charity work. It was approval for justice being served. People were clapping for the exposure of Patricia's manipulation as much as for the Foundation's mission. As the applause died down, I saw Patricia finally move toward one of the gallery exits, her composure completely shattered. But before she could escape, a voice called out from the crowd. "Mrs. Kensington, do you have any comment about these allegations?" Sarah Kim from the Portland Business Journal had positioned herself between Patricia and the exit, her phone recording and her expression professionally neutral but clearly expectant. Patricia stopped, trapped between fleeing in obvious guilt and staying to face questions she couldn't answer without incriminating herself further. The room held its breath as she stood frozen in the spotlight of public attention. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," Patricia said finally, her voice strained but attempting to maintain dignity. "The Cultural Commission takes all citizen concerns seriously, and I'm sure Ms. Sterling was simply trying to be helpful." "But Ms. Sterling had no authority to shut down the event," Sarah pressed. "Are you saying you were unaware of the limitations of her position when you asked her to intervene?" The question was perfectly crafted, offering Patricia no good options. Admitting ignorance made her look incompetent. Denying involvement contradicted the evidence I'd just presented. Acknowledging that she'd known about Amanda's limitations was essentially confessing to the conspiracy. "I never asked anyone to intervene," Patricia said, but her voice lacked conviction and her body language suggested someone who knew they'd been caught. "Then how do you explain the 45-minute conversation with Ms. Sterling immediately before she claimed enforcement authority?" Sarah asked, consulting her notes with professional precision. Patricia's face flushed red, anger overriding her usual political instincts. "That conversation was private, and I resent the implication that supporting civic engagement constitutes some kind of conspiracy." Supporting civic engagement by encouraging someone to exceed their official authority? I did no such thing. But even as she denied it, Patricia's voice carried the sharp edge of someone who knew their denials. Weren't convincing anyone. The evidence was too clear, the timeline too precise, the coordination too obvious. "Mrs. Kensington," came another voice from the crowd. I turned to see Helen Crawford stepping forward, her expression stern with the authority of someone who'd been navigating Portland society longer than Patricia had been alive. "I was present at the anniversary celebration, and I witnessed your conversation with Ms. Sterling. I also observed your behavior after Victoria left. You seemed remarkably well informed about Cultural Commission procedures for someone who claims no involvement in the evening's events." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Helen Crawford's reputation for truth-telling was legendary in Portland circles, and her willingness to publicly contradict Patricia carried enormous weight. "Furthermore," Helen continued, "I've heard you making calls discouraging people from attending tonight's fundraiser. If you truly believed this was about civic engagement rather than personal vendetta, why would you try to prevent people from learning about government transparency?" Patricia looked around the room desperately, seeking allies or escape routes, but finding neither. The crowd that had once deferred to her social authority now watched her with skeptical eyes and growing understanding of what she'd done. "I think," said a new voice, "that we've heard enough." Everyone turned to see Robert Kensington stepping forward, his face gray with embarrassment and what looked like dawning horror. Patricia's husband rarely spoke at public events, preferring to let his wife handle social situations, but his expression suggested a man who'd finally seen something he couldn't ignore. "Patricia, we're leaving," he said quietly, but his voice carried clearly through the silent gallery. "Now." The dismissal was devastating in its simplicity. No defense of his wife, no attempt to minimize the damage, just the firm directive of someone who recognized that the situation was beyond salvage. Patricia looked at him with something approaching panic, perhaps realizing that the consequences of her actions might extend beyond social embarrassment to her marriage itself. "Robert, surely you don't believe—" "I believe what I've seen with my own eyes and heard with my own ears," he said, cutting her off with uncharacteristic firmness. "And what I've seen tonight is deeply disappointing." He turned to address the crowd, his voice formal but sincere. "I apologize to Victoria and Daniel for my wife's behavior. There's no excuse for what happened at your anniversary celebration, and there's no excuse for the continued campaign against your reputation." The public rebuke from her own husband was the final blow to Patricia's already shattered composure. She looked around the room one last time, meeting my eyes with an expression of pure hatred, before turning and walking rapidly toward the nearest exit. Robert followed more slowly, pausing near Daniel to place a hand on his son's shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "She's gone too far this time." The gallery remained silent until the Kensingtons were completely gone, then erupted in a buzz of conversation and speculation. People gathered in small groups, dissecting what they'd witnessed and sharing their own observations about Patricia's behavior over the years. I remained at the podium, feeling strangely empty, despite the completeness of my vindication. The truth was now public, Patricia's manipulation exposed and my reputation restored. But the victory felt hollow in a way I hadn't expected. "That was incredible," Brooke said, appearing at my side with a glass of wine I desperately needed. "You completely dismantled her." "I presented the facts," I corrected, though I understood what she meant. Patricia dismantled herself. Same result. Everyone in this room now understands exactly what happened and who was responsible. Sarah Kim approached with her phone still recording, her expression professionally appreciative. "Victoria, that was one of the most thoroughly documented exposures of social manipulation I've ever witnessed. Would you be willing to do a follow-up interview for the Business Journal?" Of course. Transparency was the whole point of tonight. "And the foundation? Are you planning to continue advocating for government accountability?" I looked around the gallery, noting the conversation still buzzing with energy and indignation. People were genuinely angry about what Patricia had done, not just to me personally, but to the principle of honest governance. "The foundation will continue as long as there's a need for it," I said. Tonight proved that need exists. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, many stopped to express support and share their own stories of Patricia's manipulation over the years. Apparently, my experience wasn't unique. It was just the first time someone had documented and exposed her methods so thoroughly. "She's been doing things like this for decades," one woman told me, "destroying people who threaten her social position, using her connections to punish anyone who doesn't defer to her authority. You're the first person who's ever fought back successfully. Why hasn't anyone exposed her before?" "Because she's too smart to leave evidence and too powerful to challenge safely. You had documentation, witnesses, and most importantly, you had nothing left to lose. That made you dangerous in a way she didn't anticipate." Daniel appeared. As the last guests were leaving, his expression exhausted but relieved. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Vindicated, exhausted. Sad about what this means for your family." My family needed to see the truth about her. Maybe now Dad will finally understand why our relationship has been so difficult. We stood together in the now empty gallery, surrounded by the artwork that had witnessed Patricia's public downfall. The evening had accomplished everything I'd hoped for and more. But the victory came with costs I was only beginning to understand. "What happens now?" Daniel asked. "Now we go home and start rebuilding without her shadow hanging over us." "And your business?" "Will probably benefit from tonight more than it was ever hurt by Saturday evening. People respect someone who stands up to bullies, even powerful ones." As we gathered our things and prepared to leave, I noticed a small group of people still clustered near the donation table, writing checks and discussing the foundation's future work. Tonight hadn't just vindicated me personally, it had created something larger, a movement toward accountability that might outlast my individual grievances. Outside, Portland's night air was crisp and clean, the city lights reflecting off the sea. Windows of buildings that suddenly felt more welcoming than they had in weeks. I'd walked into the museum that evening as someone whose reputation was under attack. I was leaving as someone who'd not only defended herself but inspired others to demand better from their public institutions. The satisfaction was deeper than simple revenge. It was the feeling of having stood for something important and won. The aftermath unfolded like ripples spreading across a still pond, each wave carrying consequences that reached far beyond what I'd initially imagined. Monday morning brought the Portland Business Journal article, front page coverage with the headline, "Local CEO Exposes Municipal Authority Abuse at Charity Fundraiser." Sarah Kim's reporting was thorough and devastating, complete with quotes from witnesses and copies of the documentation I'd presented. But it was the social media response that truly surprised me. Within hours of the article's publication, my company's LinkedIn page was flooded with connection requests from business leaders across the Pacific Northwest. The phone started ringing before I'd even finished my first cup of coffee. Calls from potential clients who wanted to work with someone who had both the strategic thinking and moral backbone to stand up to institutional corruption. Victoria. Hayes Marketing? The voice on the phone was crisp, professional, unmistakably East Coast. "This is Margaret Chen, CEO of Cascade Technologies. I read about your fundraiser in the Business Journal this morning, and I'd like to discuss a significant marketing contract. I'm flattered by your interest, but I should mention that the situation with the Cultural Commission might generate ongoing media attention. Ms. Hayes, that's exactly why I'm calling. We need someone who understands how to navigate complex political situations and isn't afraid to stand up for what's right. When can we meet?" Similar calls came throughout the morning. The CEO of VI, Oregon's largest nonprofit, wanted help with a transparency campaign. A group of small business owners asked about collective advocacy against regulatory overreach. A tech startup founder specifically cited my elegant destruction of corrupt authority as the reason for choosing my firm over 3 larger competitors. By noon, I'd scheduled enough consultation meetings to fill the next 2 weeks, with potential contract values that would make this the most profitable month in my company's history. Brooke found me at my desk around lunchtime, staring at my calendar in something approaching disbelief. "Having second thoughts about taking down Portland's queen bee?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk with her usual directness. "Just processing the fact that destroying my mother-in-law's reputation might be the best business decision I've ever made. People want to work with someone who fights smart and wins clean. What you did Saturday night wasn't just personal vindication. It was a masterclass in crisis management and strategic communication." The landline rang again, and I gestured for Brooke to answer while I reviewed the morning's email flood. She took notes on a legal pad, occasionally raising her eyebrows at whatever she was hearing. "That was the Portland Chamber of Commerce," she said after hanging up. "They want you to speak at their quarterly meeting about corporate ethics and public accountability." "Me? Speaking to the Chamber of Commerce?" Apparently, Saturday night impressed some very important people. Helen Crawford has been making calls on your behalf, describing you as exactly the kind of principled business leader Portland needs more of. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months ago, I'd been desperately seeking Helen Crawford's approval for my business. Now she was actively promoting my reputation throughout the city's power structure. But it was the personal calls that proved more complicated. Daniel's phone had been buzzing all morning with messages from family members and family friends, ranging from supportive to confused to outright hostile. The Kensington family's social circle was fracturing along lines of loyalty and pragmatism. "Uncle Mark called," Daniel reported when he stopped by the office that afternoon. "He wants to have dinner this week to discuss the family situation." That sounds ominous. He's Dad's brother, but he's also been watching Mom's behavior for years without saying anything. I think Saturday night gave him permission to finally acknowledge what everyone's been seeing. The family dynamics were shifting in ways that went far beyond my conflict with Patricia. Robert Kensington had apparently spent Sunday morning having very pointed conversations with his wife about her methods and priorities. According to Daniel, his father was horrified not just by the anniversary party sabotage, but by the broader pattern of manipulation that my presentation had revealed. "Dad's talking about family therapy," Daniel said with a rueful smile. 40 years of marriage, and he's finally realizing that his wife has been systematically destroying relationships behind his back. How do you feel about that? Relieved, honestly. I've spent my whole adult life making excuses for her behavior, trying to find middle ground between her disapproval and my love for you. Now I don't have to anymore. The conversation was interrupted by my assistant announcing that Amanda Sterling was in the lobby, requesting a meeting. I exchanged glances with Daniel and Brooke, none of us quite sure what to expect from Patricia's disgraced accomplice. Amanda looked terrible when she entered my office, her usual polished appearance replaced by the hollow-eyed exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept in days. She sat stiffly in the chair across from my desk, clutching a manila folder against her chest like armor. "I came to apologize," she said without preamble, "and to give you this." She handed me the folder, which contained printed copies of text messages between her and Patricia spanning the last 6 months. The content was damning: discussions of my business reputation, speculation about financial difficulties, and, most tellingly, detailed planning for Saturday night's intervention. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, scanning messages that confirmed every suspicion I'd had about the coordination behind the anniversary party disruption. "Because I'm done being Patricia Kensington's weapon." Amanda's voice was bitter with self-recrimination. "She convinced me that you were some kind of social climber who was embarrassing the family, that your business was failing, and you were using the anniversary party to create a false impression of success. And you believed her?" I wanted to believe her. Patricia has been my mentor for years, helped me get the cultural commission job, introduced me to all the right people. When she asked for this favor, it seemed like a small thing compared to everything she'd done for me. Impersonating an enforcement officer and disrupting a legal event is not a small thing. I know that now. But at the time, she made it sound like we were saving you from public embarrassment, preventing you from overextending yourself financially in a desperate attempt to impress people who saw right through you. The twisted logic was almost impressive. Patricia had convinced Amanda that sabotaging my celebration was actually an act of kindness, protecting me from my own poor judgment. She said your marriage was in trouble because you were becoming obsessed with social status, that Daniel was embarrassed by your need for validation, and that someone needed to intervene before you destroyed your relationship. Each revelation was another layer of Patricia's manipulation, showing how she'd crafted a narrative that made Amanda feel justified in exceeding her authority. It was psychological manipulation of the highest order, targeting Amanda's loyalty and sense of righteousness. What changed your mind? Saturday night. When I saw your face as you walked out of that ballroom, when I realized that you genuinely didn't understand what was happening or why, I started questioning everything Patricia had told me. Amanda reached into her purse and pulled out a resignation letter, already signed and dated. "I submitted this to the Cultural Commission this morning. I can't represent public integrity when I've allowed myself to be used to undermine it." The resignation felt like both justice and tragedy. Amanda had made terrible choices, but she'd been manipulated by someone far more experienced in psychological warfare. "There's something else," Amanda continued. "Patricia's been making calls since Saturday night, trying to manage the damage. She's telling people that you've had some kind of breakdown, that the stress of running a business and trying to fit into Portland society has made you paranoid and vindictive. Of course she is. But it's not working. Too many people witnessed what happened and your presentation was too thorough. She's actually making herself look worse by continuing to attack you. After Amanda left, I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the text messages she'd provided. The level of premeditation was staggering. Patricia had been planning some form of public humiliation for months, waiting for the right opportunity to strike with maximum impact. But the messages also revealed something else. Patricia's genuine fear of my growing success and social acceptance. She'd seen my business thriving, noticed my expanding network of professional relationships, and recognized that I was becoming a legitimate force in Portland society rather than the temporary interloper she'd always assumed I'd be. The anniversary party had been the perfect target because it represented everything she feared. My financial success, my social confidence, and my permanent place in the family structure. By destroying that celebration, she'd hoped to reduce me back to the insecure outsider she'd always believed I was. Instead, she'd created the conditions for her own downfall. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing in the same ballroom at Riverside Manor where everything had started, but this time the circumstances were completely different. The Portland Business Council was hosting their annual awards dinner, and I'd been nominated for their Entrepreneur of the Year recognition. The irony was delicious. The venue that had witnessed my public humiliation was now hosting my professional celebration. I wore a different dress, carried myself with different energy, and approached the evening with completely different expectations. Daniel looked magnificent in his tuxedo, his pride evident in every gesture and expression. He'd been receiving his own recognition lately, as colleagues and friends acknowledged his courage in supporting his wife against family pressure. "Any regrets?" he asked as we entered the ballroom where tables draped in gold linens hosted Portland's business elite. "None whatsoever." The evening proceeded with the kind of elegant predictability that characterized Portland's high society events. Cocktails flowed, conversations buzzed with the energy of networking and deal-making, and award presentations celebrated the year's most significant business achievements. When my category was announced, I felt surprisingly calm. Win or lose, I'd already achieved something more important than any award: complete professional vindication and a reputation built on truth rather than manipulation. The Entrepreneur of the Year award recognizes not just business success, but leadership, integrity, and positive community impact, the presenter announced. This year's recipient has demonstrated all of these qualities, along with the courage to stand up for transparency and accountability in public service. My name was called to sustained applause, and as I walked to the podium to accept the crystal trophy, I saw familiar faces throughout the crowd. Helen Crawford beamed with approval. Sarah Kim from the Business Journal snapped photos for tomorrow's coverage. City Council members nodded with respect. And in the back corner, almost hidden behind a pillar, I spotted Robert Kensington sitting alone at a table, applauding with what looked like genuine admiration. "Thank you for this incredible honor," I said into the microphone, my voice steady and clear. Success in business isn't just about profit margins and growth metrics. It's about building something meaningful, contributing to your community, and never compromising your principles for short-term advantage. I paused, looking out over the crowd of faces that had once seemed so intimidating and now felt like colleagues and allies. Sometimes, standing up for what's right comes with costs. But the alternative, allowing dishonesty and manipulation to go unchallenged, comes with costs that are far greater. Tonight's award belongs not just to me, but to everyone who chooses truth over convenience, courage over conformity. The applause was thunderous, and as I left the stage with my trophy, I felt something I'd been seeking for 5 years finally settle into place. Complete acceptance, earned through merit rather than manipulation. After the ceremony, as guests mingled during the reception, Robert Kensington approached me near the dessert table. He looked older than I remembered, the events of recent weeks having carved new lines around his eyes. "Victoria," he said quietly, extending his hand. "Congratulations. You've earned this recognition." "Thank you, Robert. I appreciate you saying that. I owe you an apology, a bigger one than I can properly express here." He glanced around the crowded ballroom, ensuring our conversation remained private. "I've spent 40 years making excuses for Patricia's behavior, telling myself that her methods were harsh, but her intentions were good. You couldn't have known how far she'd go." I should have known. The signs were always there, but I chose not to see them because acknowledging them would have required action I wasn't prepared to take. He paused, his expression heavy with regret. "She's moving out of the house this week." The news shouldn't have surprised me, but it did. Despite everything that had happened, some part of me had expected the Kensington marriage to weather this crisis as it had apparently weathered others. "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be. It's long overdue. Patricia has spent decades using our family's reputation and resources to wage personal vendettas against people who threatened her sense of control. You were just the latest target, but you were also the first person with the courage and capability to fight back effectively. What will you do now? Try to repair some of the damage she's caused over the years. Reach out to people she's hurt, make amends where possible, and hope that the Kensington name can eventually represent something better than manipulation and social intimidation." As Robert walked away, I felt an unexpected wave of sympathy for him. He'd been married to Patricia's public persona for decades, perhaps never fully understanding the private machinery of destruction she operated behind the scenes. Daniel appeared at my side, following my gaze as his father disappeared into the crowd. "He told you about the separation?" "Just now. How are you handling it?" "Better than I expected. It's not like they were happy together. They were just committed to maintaining appearances. Maybe now they can both figure out who they actually are without the performance." We stood together at the edge of the reception, watching Portland's business and social elite celebrate another year of achievements and networking. The energy was familiar, but felt different now, less intimidating and more welcoming. "What's next for us?" Daniel asked. "More of this, I hope. Building something real instead of fighting something false." 3 months later, I stood in the office space that would house the expanded headquarters of Hayes Marketing Solutions, watching contractors install signage that reflected our new status as one of Portland's fastest-growing agencies. The client roster had tripled since the Cultural Commission incident, and we'd hired 4 new employees to handle the increased workload. Brooke found me there, reviewing architectural plans for the space that would accommodate our growth. "Any word from Patricia?" she asked, settling into one of the folding chairs that served as temporary furniture. "Nothing direct, but I heard she's moved to Seattle, taken a position with some philanthropy organization up there. Starting fresh where people don't know her methods. Or maybe learning from this experience and becoming someone better. People can change. You're more generous than I would be. I can afford to be generous. She lost everything she'd spent decades building, while I gained more than I'd ever imagined possible." The truth was, I rarely thought about Patricia anymore. Her manipulation had been exposed, her influence neutralized, and her presence removed from my daily life. The space she'd occupied in my mind was now filled with business plans, client strategies, and the kind of positive challenges that came with success. The Citizens for Transparent Governance Foundation had grown beyond anything I'd originally envisioned. Donations continued to flow in from people who'd witnessed the anniversary party incident or read about it in the media. We'd already funded legal assistance for a dozen Portland residents who'd encountered various forms of bureaucratic abuse, and inquiries were coming in from other cities interested in replicating our model. That evening, Daniel and I hosted a small dinner party at our house, celebrating the business expansion with close friends and new clients who'd become genuine allies. The guest list was carefully curated, including only people who'd supported us through the difficult period or who'd been drawn to work with us because of our principles rather than despite them. As our guests laughed and shared stories around the dining room table, I caught Daniel's eye across the room and saw my own satisfaction reflected in his expression. We'd not only survived Patricia's attack, but emerged stronger and more successful than ever. Any regrets? Helen Crawford asked me as the evening wound down, echoing the question that had become something of a running theme in recent months. None, I replied, and realized I meant it completely. Standing in my kitchen later that night, washing wine, glasses, and replaying the evening's conversations, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. 6 months ago, I'd been desperately seeking acceptance from people who would never truly welcome me. Now, I was surrounded by genuine allies who valued my character and capabilities. Patricia had tried to write me out of the story, to reduce me to a footnote in the Kensington family narrative. Instead, she'd given me the opportunity to write my own story, one built on truth rather than manipulation, achievement rather than inherited status, and courage rather than compliance. The anniversary party that was supposed to be my humiliation had become the foundation of my greatest triumph. Sometimes the best revenge really is just succeeding beyond your enemy's worst fears. Outside the kitchen window, Portland's lights twinkled like stars against the darkness, and for the first time since moving to this city, I felt completely at home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.